hypermasculinity or masculinity in women can be a sign of trauma for so many. Assalamu alaikum, ladies who are watching this. I am back after a much needed break, and we are going to be talking about a topic that has been all over my Instagram. I've seen it all over YouTube, but I think it needs a bit more nuance. I think that we need to talk about it from the perspective of what is happening to us when we shift more into our masculine energy because of trauma. And so I'm here to do that for you guys. We're going to bring in the science of what's happening in our brain and body. We are going to give actual practical tips to navigate this. And there's a future video coming out where I'm going to give you guys the full-blown system to becoming more feminine. This is going to be a straight shot without any editing, so I hope that you guys enjoy, inshallah. If you're new here, assalamu alaikum. My name is Hannah. I am a trauma coach who works with Muslim women to help them heal their trauma, integrate their trauma, and regulate their nervous systems. I'm also a PA. I practice medicine, and so I absolutely love bringing in the very real science behind trauma healing and trauma integration. So what's been going on? There has been this huge wave of women all of a sudden being so interested in tapping into their femininity, becoming more feminine. We often hear it as, leaning more into your feminine energy. And I've come across several coaches who work on this. I've seen a lot of really cool content around this, but I wanted to come to it with a more solid framework or a way to think about this for ladies who are healing from trauma, who find themselves struggling with their femininity because of their trauma. So let's start off by talking about what happens to our femininity when we've experienced trauma. Well, there's a lot of nuance that is here. So first of all, let's just start with the background. For many of us, especially those of us who grew up in Western societies, there has been a push towards women becoming more masculine. This was in the frame of women's rights. And so this idea that in order for women to be able to achieve just as much as what men have been able to achieve in, societies, that women would have to adopt masculine traits and masculine ways of living in order to achieve that. Now, that's all fine and dandy if there's a woman who wants to go about that, but it neglects a very important aspect of female biology, which is the fact that men operate on a 24-hour hormone system, whereas women, like me and those of you watching, we operate on for most women, 28-day hormone cycle. Now, not everyone is 28 days. Often I need to preface this because, again, my background is in medicine, so it would be odd for me not to, but not everybody's 28 days. Sometimes it's 30. Some women have irregular menstrual cycles due to underlying conditions. But the point is, we don't have the same levels of energy every single day. We don't have the same levels of motivation every day. We don't have the same levels of focus every day. Now, this isn't because of some flaw in the female design. This isn't because of some inability of women. This is because hormones are chemical messengers in our body that are released through a cascade coming from our brain to different parts of our body that literally tell our bodies to operate in certain ways so that we are able to prep ourselves for reproduction. This is a part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's beautiful design of us. And we have been shamed about it for so long that we can't operate in it. And we've been told to force ourselves to operate on this 24-hour cycle when that is not how our body is designed. And so more and more women are coming to this point, realizing that when we try to go about life in the way that society tells of women we need to in order to be quote unquote successful, whatever that means, we're burning out. We're getting sick. We're feeling exhausted all the time. And all of a sudden, there has been this huge insurgence of autoimmune conditions in women across the board. Now, there's several different reasons for this. Oftentimes, people will be like, well, the only reason the autoimmune conditions are so common is because of the way society treats women, this, and that. It's a lot more complex than that. Again, let's go back to the science. But a huge contributor is the constant stress that women are being put under and forcing themselves to push themselves beyond the limits of what our body is telling us we can do. Now, what's an autoimmune condition? For those of you guys who don't know, an autoimmune condition is essentially a condition in which our immune system attacks itself. It attacks the body. Some very common types of autoimmune conditions you might have heard of: Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, so issues with the thyroid, rheumatoid arthritis. There are a lot of women who have skin conditions that are autoimmune in nature. And another huge root for autoimmune conditions is trauma. It is very well known and very well established that autoimmune conditions, or autoimmunity in general, is contributed to by trauma. That people who experience trauma have a higher rate, and especially if you are a woman, you have the highest rate and risk of autoimmune disease. Why am I even mentioning this? What I'm saying, ladies, is that unfortunately the way that we were told to operate throughout our lives is not contributing to our highest health. And when you have experienced trauma also, whether in the past or the present, it's even more burdensome on our bodies. And so we have to be super mindful of that. Now, with all of that being said, many of us adopted a very masculine frame of living. We were told that we have to become more assertive and we need to take up space, and so many different phrases and ideas. And I'm not saying that a woman needs to be seen and not heard. I'm not saying that you can't assert yourself. In fact, I think I hold a very different philosophy on femininity and masculinity than most content creators around this topic do. But what I do believe wholeheartedly is that as Muslim women, first and foremost, we need to respect the limits of our body, and we need to understand that there are certain adab, there are certain ways of behaving, there are certain ways of acting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves for us, and that the Prophet ﷺ emphasized for women. And that is not because of some patriarchal standard, it's not because of some oppression, it's not because men wanted to take advantage of the world, it's because that these are the ways of behaving and acting that help maintain the highest level of good for us, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, subhanAllah. And so in order to enter into the era of our healing, we have to be super confident in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only wants what's best for us. And so when we can re-engage with that, what happens is we start to release these old beliefs about how to be successful in the need to operate from a masculine frame or to adopt these hyper masculine traits, and we start being more okay with being feminine and whatever we associate with femininity, softness, gentleness. The Prophet ﷺ said that gentleness is not in anything except that it beautifies it. And being a more understanding and being able to use our desire, our expression of our desire to get what we want instead of having to command it. So that is a super powerful way of shifting the way we go about things. Now, here is a philosophy that I have. And we'll also talk about why is it that so many women who experience trauma are hypermasculine. Masculinity and femininity it's a spectrum, and there are different traits associated with it. And there are times in our lives where we are going to have to tap into more masculine traits because that is what's needed at that time, right? And there are times where we are going to find that we tap more into our feminine traits. Whereas for a woman, my philosophy is that we want to spend more time in our femininity, more time in our feminine traits, because that's where our nervous system feels safe. That's where we're able to feel good about where we are without the crushing pressure of societal expectations. But we can also tap into the masculine traits when it is advantageous for us to do so. And vice versa for men. The Prophet ﷺ was extremely caring, extremely merciful, extremely loving towards his grandchildren and his wives and his daughters, right? And those are feminine traits. Now, that's not to say the Prophet ﷺ is feminine. The point is every trait that we can put in front of us either leans more masculine or feminine. And we have the balance of the way we deal with it. For example, Umar ibn Khattab had some very intensely masculine traits. His assertiveness, his willingness to call things out right then and there, those were more masculine traits. But there were times when he would call out and he would be much more introspective and much more to himself and much more quiet. And those are more feminine traits. Again, this is not a reflection of the person themselves. It's just a reflection of the character trait that they are exemplifying in that time. So let's make sure we understand that, because people tend to get very triggered when we're having conversations about masculinity and femininity. That is a sign that you are not ready for the conversations, and there's a lot more healing that needs to take place before you continue with that. So moving on, right? If we can move, I'll give an example. I'm a PA. I practice medicine. There's a lot of femininity that can go very wrong in the clinic or in an examination room with the patient. First of all, it can be taken very inappropriately, considering I am their medical caregiver, and that's not always the way. There are certain elements of femininity that need to be reeled in. But there are also times where very important conversations and discussions need to happen, which require me to be able to step a little bit more into my masculine side. In addition, I'm managing a team. I have x-ray techs and medical assistants and people who are going to be listening to what I do. And so there are sometimes more masculine aspects that I have to step into. But that can be done without going to the extreme. So I hope that makes sense when I say that we need to be, I believe there needs to be a little less rigidity in these different, in the way we move through the spectrum, while also recognizing that we want to, again, live more in our feminine energy, I guess you can call it. Why do so many women who experience trauma end up being super hyper masculine or masculine in general? Well, the thing about masculinity and masculine traits is that they're very rigid. They're extremely protective. And we think of there's a design to that, right? When we think about the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed the human nature, right? Is that the men in our lives are supposed to be the protectors and providers of us, right? And we think about the verse in the Quran, "Rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." They are the caretakers of women. They are tasked with a very heavy task. And so masculine traits allows them to enter into that task and be able to thrive in it and not get so overwhelmed by it. But when women have experienced trauma, guess what their nervous system has to do? It has to protect them. So they tend to develop masculine traits, which again are very protective in nature, in order to do that, in order to protect them. And so these masculine traits are functional. And it's really important that we understand that, because so often when I hear these conversations around women who have masculine traits, there's a lot of shaming, there's a lot of blaming, and there's not a lot of understanding. But if we can't come from a place of understanding, we're not going to get to a place of healing. That's just not how it works. We have to understand that our nervous system just wants our survival. And if we're entering into masculinity because it was protective of us, there is a reason for that. Now, that's not to explain, is not to justify. If we find that it's no longer serving us, it's harming us, it's getting in the way of our relationships, it's getting in the way of our well-being, then that means it is time to challenge that and to shift it, right? So hyper masculinity is something that we have to be super aware of for women, because if we don't, very often we don't realize how much stress we are taking on. And while there are some women who just honestly, personality-wise, do very well in intensive environments, and there's actually even a genetic component to this. This is not just something that they decide to do. That is a very small percentage of women. And so for most of us, we have to be very mindful of the amount of stress we are taking on, because otherwise our hormones will respond to that. And our hormones can only do so much or handle so much. And our nervous system can only handle so much. So again, we're going back to this place of really understanding that we need to spend more time in our femininity, where stress is a little less. We're able to cope with things and divert the insults to our nervous system in a much more contained way. So you might be asking, what are some ways, Hannah, that I can become more feminine, especially if I've been traumatized? And one example of hyper masculinity that I think is so profoundly present with the women who have experienced trauma is hyper independence. And so I will focus on this specific example for the last few minutes of this video. Hyper-independence is essentially this idea that you as a woman don't need any single person to be able to operate. So we take on the burden of stress, we take on everything ourselves, we don't trust other people to do it. This is not to be confused with healthy independence or independence in general, or self-sufficiency. You should be self-sufficient as an adult human being, man or woman. You should be able to get up and make yourself a meal. You should be able to clean up after yourself. You should be able to take care of yourself throughout your day. That is an essential part of being an adult. But hyper-independence puts up this block where other people are unsafe or not good enough to be trusted, and only I can trust myself. That right there, although it's a very functional trauma response, it is not suitable for everyday living. It forces our stress hormone to continuously stay high, which takes a huge toll on our body. It forces our nervous system to remain in its traumatized, dysregulated state. It makes us feel unsafe and alone. So how do we address that? The first and foremost is practice, ladies. Practice tapping out of your hyper independence and into your healthy interdependence, into your healthy trust, which is a more feminine aspect. So one way to do this is very simple. When you find yourself about to do something that is not a big deal, not a huge thing, right? But you know someone else would gladly help you with it, go ask that person for help, right? Example, you need to carry something that it's heavy, but it's not so heavy that you can't do it by yourself. Go find someone, man or woman, a family member, if you're married, your husband, a sibling, right, a friend, and just ask them to help you. And allow the point that I'm trying to make here is when we practice these in micro doses, we show ourselves that the hyper independence doesn't always have to be present. We show our nervous system, hey, we can be safe trusting someone. We can be served by other people, and it's okay to ask for help. And you continue to do that until you start to notice that you don't need to rely so much on your hyper independence. Another example, sometimes with hyper independence, when someone helps us voluntarily, someone opens a door for us, or we drop something and someone picks it up off the ground, we almost get offended or we get taken aback. And one way to, again, microdose ourselves into femininity in that instance is just being grateful, just saying thank you, just being kind and respectful, and not wondering why they did it or feeling or taken aback or even upset about it, but just say like, Alhamdulillah, look, Allah sent me this person to make my day easier. And we keep doing that. What is that going to do? Slowly, it's going to start shifting your nervous system, which has been traumatized in this really stuck state for so long, and show it, hey, this is a thing that actually is making us feel more safe over time, and it is so, so powerful. If you are a married woman, you need to practice this very, very much. You need to be very intentional about this, because I'm going to tell you right now, hyper independence will destroy your marriage. Hyper independence does destroy marriages, because in a marriage, you can't be hyper independent. You have a husband. You have someone who cares about you and loves you, hopefully, who cares about you and loves you, and wants you to lean on them, and wants you to see them as someone who can help you and who can uplift you. And so when we are stuck in our hyper independence, we're taking that away from our husbands. We're disrupting their masculine frame, and we are, in a sense, taking away opportunities for them to love us in the way that they want to love us. And then that confirms to our nervous system, hey, I'm not lovable and I'm not good enough. But in reality, it was just because we were blocking it by being in this energy. Femininity, there are lots of different things you can do that are very stereotypical, but I like things that are much more practical, that really show our nervous system like, hey, let's disrupt the pattern. So other things that you can do, I'm sure you've already heard it. Go take a nice bubble bath, put on makeup when you're at home, and just allow yourself to, feel pretty. Do your hair up, I'm assuming a lot of my viewers wear hijab. So when you're at home, do your hair, dress up at home just because it makes you feel good. Bake something and share it with someone and let them see you smile. Call someone and just make it a point to make that conversation as enjoyable as possible and sweet as possible, right? And just allow those moments to accumulate and just allow you to experience the beauty of femininity. I hope that this video was helpful to you guys, and if you're a Muslim woman who has experienced trauma and you want to work through it, whether it's because you don't want to live in your masculinity anymore, you don't want to live in a traumatized nervous system anymore, go to the links in the description to learn more about how you can work with me, whether it's through my trauma group coaching program or one-on-one. And if you like this video, ladies, subscribe, like, and comment, and share it with other women who could benefit from it. I know there are a lot of videos that are like this, but I haven't come across one that talks about femininity from a nervous system perspective. I hope it was helpful, and Assalamu alaikum.